Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Olympus watching the stars drift past through the main view screen. And he had no idea that in the next few minutes his life and the life of every human in the galaxy would change forever. The Olympus was humanity's pride and joy, built with the best technology Earth could offer and sent out to explore the deep regions of space where no human had ever gone before, and Jake felt honored to command such a ship even though it was mostly just a science vessel with some basic weapons. Lisa Shang sat at her communications station, running through the daily checks of all their systems and making sure their quantum relay was working properly when suddenly every alarm on her console started screaming at once and she nearly jumped out of her chair. "Captain, we are getting a signal," Lisa said, turning to look at Jake with wide eyes. "But this is not coming from any human source, and the signal is incredibly strong, like someone is pushing massive amounts of power into their transmission." Jake walked over to Lisa's station and looked at the readings on her screen, and he could see that whatever was sending this message was using technology that was far beyond anything humans had ever built, and that worried him more than he wanted to admit. "Can you clean up the signal?" Jake asked, and Lisa nodded as she started working on her console, adjusting frequencies and running the transmission through their computer systems to try and make sense of what they were hearing. Lieutenant Commander Alex Rodriguez hurried onto the bridge after hearing the alert, and he was their best expert on alien languages, even though they had never actually found any aliens before, and everyone hoped that today might be the day that changed. The speakers crackled to life and strange sounds filled the bridge that were clearly not human voices, but somehow they carried a tone of desperation that made everyone stop what they were doing and listen carefully. "This is emergency transmission from Zephyrian Alliance to any species capable of receiving this message," the voice said after Alex managed to run it through the translation computer. "We are under attack by ancient machines called Devourers, and our worlds are being destroyed one by one." Jake felt his blood turn cold as he listened to the alien voice continue speaking and describing horrors that seemed impossible to believe, but the fear in the alien's voice was real and unmistakable. "We have lost 12 worlds in the past month, and billions of our people are dead, and our most powerful warships cannot stop these machines because they adapt to everything we try, and we do not know how much longer we can survive." Dr. Nina Foster rushed onto the bridge carrying her tablet and scanner, and she was the chief science officer and one of the smartest people Jake had ever met, and right now she looked terrified as she listened to the transmission. "The machines consume everything they touch," the alien voice continued. "They tear apart our ships and use the metal to build more of themselves, and they harvest our people for biological materials, and we have heard stories of a young, aggressive species called humans who recently achieved faster-than-light travel." Jake looked around at his crew and saw the same expression on every face that he felt on his own, because they were being asked to fight something that had destroyed civilizations far older and more advanced than humanity. "Please, if any humans receive this message, we beg for your help, because we have tried everything and nothing works, and our children are dying. And soon there will be nothing left of our people except what the machines decide to keep." The transmission repeated several times and then cut to static, and the bridge fell silent as everyone tried to process what they had just heard, and Jake realized that humanity had just received its first contact with aliens, and it was a cry for help. Lisa checked her instruments and confirmed that the signal had come from the Andromeda sector, which was weeks away even at their fastest speed, and Jake knew that Admiral Patricia Wells back on Earth would never approve a mission to help aliens when humanity barely had enough ships to protect their own colonies. "Sir, what are our orders?" Alex asked quietly, and Jake looked at the young officer and realized that everyone on the bridge was waiting for him to make a decision that could determine the fate of both humanity and these unknown aliens. Jake thought about his own children back on Earth and about all the human families living peacefully in their new colonies without knowing that somewhere in the galaxy entire civilizations were being wiped out by machines that seemed unstoppable. "Lisa, send a message to Earth Command and tell them what we heard," Jake said finally, "and then start plotting a course to the Andromeda sector, because whether Earth approves or not, we are going to help these aliens." Dr. Foster stepped forward and looked at Jake with concern. Captain, the regulations clearly state that we must wait for orders from Earth Command before taking any action, and we do not even know if these aliens are telling the truth about their situation. Jake nodded because he knew she was right about the regulations, but he also knew that by the time Earth Command made a decision and sent ships to investigate, the Zephyrian Alliance would probably be extinct, and he could not live with that on his conscience. Nina, I understand your concerns, but sometimes being human means doing what is right even when it is dangerous or against orders. Jake said, and if we are the only ones who can help, then we have a responsibility to try. The bridge crew looked at their captain, and Jake could see them making their own decisions about whether to follow him into what might be certain death, and one by one they nodded their agreement. All right then, Jake said, turning back to the view screen. Lisa, send that message to Earth, and then we're going to find out what humans can do when someone asks for help. The response from Admiral Patricia Wells came through just as Chief Engineer Tony Kim was trying to figure out how to push their engines beyond anything they were designed to handle, and the message was exactly what Jake expected it would be. Captain Morrison, you are ordered to maintain safe distance and gather intelligence only, and under no circumstances are you to engage with unknown alien forces or proceed to the Andromeda sector without further authorization. The Admiral's voice was cold and official through the speakers. Jake looked at the message timestamp and realized they were already 12 hours into their journey toward the alien distress signal, and there was no way he was turning back now, even if it meant ending his career. Tony Kim appeared on the bridge with grease on his hands and a worried expression on his face. Captain, I can give you the speed you want, but I cannot promise the engines will survive the trip, and if we push the fusion cores this hard, we might end up stranded in deep space. How long to reach the Andromeda sector? Jake asked, and Tony checked his calculations on a tablet that looked like it had been through several explosions. 3 weeks if everything goes perfectly and the hyperspace corridors stay stable, but Captain, those corridors were not designed for ships like ours, and we might tear ourselves apart trying to navigate them. Navigation Officer Rachel Brooks had been plotting their course for hours, and she looked up from her station with determination in her eyes. Sir, I can get us there, but we will have to take some risks that would normally be considered insane. Jake nodded because insane risks seemed to be exactly what the situation called for, and he had already committed his ship and crew to something that Earth Command would consider mutiny. Dr. Nina Foster had been analyzing the alien transmission, and she approached Jake with new information that made their mission even more urgent. Captain, I have been studying the Zephyrian language patterns, and their technology appears to be thousands of years ahead of ours, which means if they cannot stop these devourers, then we probably cannot either. Then why are we going? Asked weapons specialist Carlos Mendoza, who had been listening to the conversation from his station. Jake turned to look at Carlos and saw the same question in the eyes of every crew member on the bridge, because someone has to try, and because sometimes the impossible becomes possible. When people refuse to give up, the next 3 weeks transformed the Olympus from an exploration vessel into something that barely resembled its original design, and Carlos worked day and night to convert their mining lasers and construction tools into weapons that might actually hurt an enemy. Medical officer Dr. Susan Park prepared the medical bay for casualties and set up emergency surgery stations throughout the ship, because she knew that whatever they were flying into would be unlike anything humans had ever faced. Marine Commander Greg Thompson had only 20 security personnel under his command, but he drilled them constantly in combat techniques and made sure every crew member knew how to handle a weapon, because he suspected they would all be fighting before this was over. The hyperspace corridors were worse than Rachel had predicted, and the ship shook so violently that several crew members broke bones just from being thrown around, and Tony had to shut down non-essential systems to keep the engines from exploding. Captain, we are receiving more transmissions from the Zephyrian Alliance, Lisa announced during their second week of travel, and her voice was grim. They are reporting that 3 more worlds have fallen, and their main fleet has been reduced to less than 50 ships. Jake listened to the new messages and heard the desperation growing in the alien voices, and he knew that they might already be too late to save anyone, but he also knew they had to keep going. Dr. Foster made a disturbing discovery while analyzing the Devour technology described in the alien transmissions. Captain, these machines appear to learn from every encounter and they adapt their defenses to counter whatever weapons are used against them, which means conventional tactics will be useless. Then we will use unconventional tactics, Jake said, and he started developing ideas that would have gotten him court-martialed if anyone from Earth Command could hear them. Carlos had an idea that was so crazy it might actually work. Captain, what if we stop thinking about this as a space battle and start thinking about it as a street fight where anything goes and the only rule is survival? Tony Kim overheard the conversation and grinned despite their desperate situation. I can rig the fusion reactors to overload on command, and if we time it right, we could turn the entire ship into a bomb. Dr. Park looked horrified. That would kill everyone on board. Maybe, Tony admitted. But it might also kill some of these devourers and save the aliens, and sometimes that is the best trade you can make. Jake realized that his crew was already thinking like him, and they understood that this mission might require sacrifices that no military academy had ever prepared them for. Rachel Brooks announced that they were approaching the edge of the Andromeda sector, and long-range sensors were starting to pick up signs of the devastation that the aliens had described. Captain, you need to see this, Nina said, pointing at her science station screen, which showed star systems that should have been full of planets and ships, but were now empty except for floating debris. How many worlds? Jake asked quietly. At least 15 that we can detect from here, but there might be more. And Captain, some of these debris fields are so large that entire planets must have been completely disassembled. The crew stared at the sensor readings, and Jake could see fear on their faces as they realized the scale of what they were heading into, but he also saw determination because they had come too far to turn back now. "Sir, we are picking up active battle signatures," Lisa reported. "It looks like there is still fighting happening around a planet called Veltar, and there are maybe 30 Zephyrian ships trying to defend it." Jake made his decision. Rachel set course for Veltar maximum speed, and Carlos, get our weapons ready because we are about to announce to the galaxy that humanity has arrived. Tony Kim checked his engine readings one more time and then looked at Jake. "Captain, the engines are holding together but barely, and we have maybe one good fight left in us before everything falls apart." "Then we better make it count," Jake said as the Olympus dropped out of hyperspace directly into a battle zone where the last survivors of an ancient civilization were making their final stand against machines that had already consumed most of their galaxy. The view screen filled with images of alien ships that were beautiful and graceful, and obviously built by a peaceful people, and they were being systematically destroyed by dark, metallic creatures that moved through space like living nightmares. "Well, crew," Jake said, as proximity alarms started screaming and 3 massive devourer ships turned toward the Olympus. "Let's show these machines what humans do when someone asks for help." The first thing that struck Jake about the Zephyrian ships was how beautiful they were, with smooth curves and graceful lines that looked more like art than weapons of war. And the second thing he noticed was how easily the devourers were tearing them apart. Admiral Cathara commanded the last Zephyrian fleet from her flagship, the Bright Dawn, and when her communications officer told her that a primitive human vessel had just appeared in the battle zone, she could hardly believe what she was hearing. "A human ship," Cathara repeated, looking at the strange angular vessel on her screens. "But humans are barely capable of interstellar travel, and they have no experience with warfare on this scale." Her tactical officer shook his head in confusion. "Admiral, the human vessel is moving directly toward the largest devourer hunter-killer, and they are not responding to our warnings to retreat." Jake stood on the bridge of the Olympus, watching 3 devourer ships that were each the size of a small city turn their attention away from the aliens and toward his ship, and he felt his crew's fear but also their determination. "Carlos, are our weapons ready?" Jake asked, and the weapons specialist nodded while checking his improvised systems. "Captain, I have converted our mining lasers and we have some missiles, but nothing that should be able to hurt ships that big," Carlos reported honestly. Lisa Shang established communication with the Zephyrian fleet, and suddenly alien voices filled the bridge, speaking in their own language before the translation computer caught up. "Human vessel, this is Admiral Cathara of the Zephyrian Alliance. And you must retreat immediately because these machines will destroy you in minutes. The alien commander's voice carried both authority and desperation. Admiral, this is Captain Jake Morrison, and we received your distress call, and we are here to help. Jake replied, and he could hear shocked silence from the alien fleet, the nearest devourer. Hunter-killer was a massive dark shape, covered in weapons and sensors that moved through space with predatory grace, and Jake could see smaller machines detaching from its hull and flying toward the Olympus like a swarm of metallic insects. Captain, those are adaptive assault drones, Dr. Foster announced, reading her sensors. They will analyze our defenses and then adjust their weapons to penetrate our shields. Jake looked at his crew and made a decision that would have seemed insane to any military strategist. Tony, I want you to vent all our nuclear waste directly into the path of that hunter-killer and then prepare to overload the fusion cores. Tony Kim's eyes went wide. Captain, that will contaminate half the battle zone, and if I overload the cores, we will all die, maybe, but these machines adapt to logical threats. And there is nothing logical about using radioactive waste as a weapon, Jake said as he activated the ship-wide. Communications, all hands, this is the captain. And we are about to do something that no sane person would attempt. Rachel Brooks stared at her navigation screen. Sir, you want me to ram that hunter-killer, full speed ahead? Jake confirmed, and he felt the ship accelerate toward the massive devourer vessel while toxic waste streamed from their disposal systems. Admiral Cathara watched in horror as the tiny human ship charged directly at a hunter-killer that outmassed it by 1,000 to 1, and she could not understand what the humans thought they could accomplish. The devourer's adaptive systems detected the approaching waste cloud and immediately began analyzing its composition to determine the appropriate countermeasures, but the machines had never encountered a species that weaponized its own garbage. Carlos, fire everything we have directly into their sensor clusters, Jake ordered, and the Olympus's improvised weapons blazed to life, striking the hunter-killer's dark hull. The massive machine turned its attention fully to the human ship and began charging weapons that could vaporize the Olympus in seconds, but Jake was counting on the fact that it would want to study them first. Tony, now, Jake shouted, and the chief engineer triggered a cascade failure in the fusion cores that sent energy feedback through every system on the ship. The hunter-killer's adaptive systems detected the massive energy surge and tried to analyze the threat, but the feedback was coming through the waste cloud, which was interfering with their sensors. Jake felt the ship shaking apart around him as the fusion cores reached critical overload. All hands brace for impact. The Olympus slammed into the hunter-killer's hull just as the fusion cores exploded, and the massive devourer machine found itself trying to adapt to a ship that had just turned itself into a radioactive bomb. The hunter-killer's hull cracked and split as the explosion tore through its adaptive systems, and the machine began consuming itself as its own defenses turned against it, trying to counter a threat that made no logical sense. Admiral Cathara stared at her tactical display as the massive hunter-killer tore itself apart, and she realized that the humans had just accomplished something that her civilization's greatest military minds had said was impossible. How did they do that? Her tactical officer whispered, and Cathara had no answer because the human attack had violated every principle of warfare that her people understood. The other two hunter-killers stopped their assault on the Zephyrian fleet and turned toward the expanding debris cloud where the Olympus had been, and their sensors worked frantically to analyze what had just happened. Jake found himself floating in the emergency command center that Tony had set up in the ship's most protected section, and somehow half his crew had survived the explosion, though the Olympus was now just a drifting wreck. Did it work? Jake asked through the pain in his head, and Lisa checked her emergency communications equipment. Captain, the hunter-killer is destroyed, and the other two are retreating. Lisa reported with amazement in her voice. They appear to be afraid of us. Dr. Foster was treating injured crew members, but she looked up long enough to explain what she had observed. Captain, the Devourer adaptive systems were designed to counter logical military threats, but our attack made no sense from their perspective, so they could not adapt to it. Admiral Cathara's voice came through their damaged communications system. Captain Morrison, your ship appears to be destroyed, but we are detecting life signs and we are sending rescue shuttles immediately. Admiral, we appreciate the help, but first you need to know that there are more humans coming, Jake said as he watched Tony working to restore their long-range sensors. More humans? Cathara asked with something that might have been hope in her voice. Admiral, our entire fleet is probably 3 days behind us, and when they see what happened here, they are going to be very angry, Jake said, and he could hear shocked silence from the alien fleet. Greg Thompson managed to restore some of their external cameras, and the crew of the Olympus got their first look at the aliens, who had called for help, and they saw graceful beings with large eyes that held both intelligence and kindness. Captain, why did your people come to help us when you barely know we exist? Admiral Cathara asked, and Jake thought about all the human families back on Earth who would never know that their children had died to save aliens. Admiral, because when someone cries for help, the only right thing to do is answer, Jake said simply. The Zephyrian rescue shuttles approached the wreckage of the Olympus, and Admiral Cathara found herself looking at creatures that had just redefined her understanding of warfare and sacrifice. Tactical analysis, she ordered, and her officer shook his head in confusion. Admiral, the human attack made no tactical sense, but it worked, and if more humans are coming with similar tactics, the Devourers may not be able to adapt quickly enough to stop them. Cathara looked at the expanding debris field where a human ship had sacrificed itself to save people it had never met, and she realized that perhaps the galaxy's salvation would come from the most unlikely source imaginable. The news of the Olympus's sacrifice spread through the remaining Zephyrian networks faster than their quantum communications had ever carried information before, and in hidden bases and damaged ships throughout the Andromeda sector, aliens who had given up hope suddenly began to believe again. Captain Jake Morrison recovered from his injuries aboard the Zephyrian medical ship Healing Light and found himself surrounded by alien doctors who treated him with a mixture of medical care and something that could only be described as reverence. Admiral Cathara visited Jake every day and brought reports from across the sector, and each day the news was the same: more human ships were arriving, and each one fought the Devourers in ways that made no sense but somehow worked. Captain, your people are quite insane, Cathara said during one of her visits, but she said it with admiration rather than criticism. Yesterday, a human cargo ship filled itself with garbage and industrial chemicals and rammed a Devourer cruiser, and the explosion created a toxic cloud that the machines could not analyze. Jake smiled despite the pain from his wounds. Admiral, you have not seen anything yet, because those were just our exploration and cargo vessels, and our actual military fleet should arrive soon. The human fleet that emerged from hyperspace 3 days later was not impressive by Zephyrian standards, because it consisted of only 47 actual military vessels and hundreds of converted civilian ships. But what impressed Cathara was how quickly they organized themselves for combat. Admiral Patricia Wells had disobeyed direct orders from Earth Command to bring the entire human fleet to the Andromeda sector, and when she saw the wreckage of the Olympus floating in space, her expression became something that made even her own officers nervous. Admiral, the Devourers have pulled back to analyze our tactics, reported Captain Ben Hayes from the destroyer UES Defiance, but our intelligence suggests they are preparing a massive counterattack with thousands of smaller units. Patricia Wells looked at the tactical display showing Devourer forces massing in nearby systems and realized that humanity was about to face its first real test as a spacefaring species. All ships, this is Admiral Wells, and I want every captain to understand that we are not just fighting for ourselves, but for every living being in this galaxy. Chief Engineer Tony Kim had been transferred to the flagship UES Liberty and was working with alien engineers to develop new weapons and tactics that combined human creativity with Zephyrian technology. Admiral, the Zephyrians have energy shields that are far superior to ours, but they have never thought to use them offensively, Tony reported during a strategy meeting. I think we can turn their defensive systems into weapons. Captain Lisa Chang now commanded the rebuilt communications vessel UES Signal and had established a network that allowed human and Zephyrian forces to coordinate their attacks in real time. The first major battle came when Devourer forces attacked the agricultural worlds that fed the remaining Zephyrian population, and Admiral Wells deployed her fleet in a formation that would have horrified any military academy instructor. Captain Carlos Mendoza commanded a squadron of converted cargo haulers that had been filled with everything from nuclear waste to kitchen appliances, and his orders were to ram any devourer ship that got too close to the agricultural worlds. All ships remember that these machines adapt to logical threats, so we are going to be as illogical as possible. Admiral Wells announced over the fleet communications, and if anyone has any ideas that seem completely insane, please share them immediately. The Devourers attacked with swarms of smaller vessels that could adapt to human weapons within minutes, but they had not prepared for humans who treated their own ships as expendable ammunition. Captain Jenny Hayes led a squadron of volunteer pilots and fighters that had been modified to explode on command, and she dove her entire squadron into the middle of a Devourer formation while singing old Earth folk songs. Over the radio, the Devourer adaptive systems tried desperately to analyze the threat posed by singing humans and exploding fighters, but their logic circuits overloaded, trying to determine whether the music was some form of sonic weapon. Marine Commander Greg Thompson had been promoted to lead boarding parties against crippled Devourer vessels, and his tactics involved everything from ancient Earth combat techniques to improvised weapons made from anything they could find. Thompson, what is your status? Admiral Wells asked during one particularly chaotic battle. Admiral, we have secured the Devourer command ship, and my Marines are currently fighting their way to the central processor using frying pans and fire extinguishers, Thompson reported. Calmly, Dr. Nina Foster had established a research station aboard the Zephyrian science vessel. Deep thought and was analyzing captured Devourer technology to find more weaknesses they could exploit. Admiral, I have discovered something important about how these machines think, Nina reported. They process information logically and sequentially, which means they cannot handle multiple contradictory inputs at the same time. Explain, Wells said while watching her fleet engage Devourer forces around the third agricultural world. If we can present them with several impossible situations simultaneously, their adaptive systems will lock up trying to process everything at once, Nina explained. It is like giving a computer program contradictory instructions. Admiral Wells smiled grimly. All ships, this is new tactical directive, and I want every captain to do something that makes absolutely no sense while also doing something that makes perfect sense at exactly the same time. The battle around the agricultural worlds became a nightmare for the Devourer adaptive systems as human ships simultaneously retreated and attacked using weapons that were both incredibly advanced and ridiculously primitive. Captain Tony Kim rigged a cargo hauler to broadcast surrender signals while also charging its engines for a ramming attack, and the Devourer ships that approached to accept the surrender found themselves being attacked by a ship that was trying to give up. Dr. Susan Park led medical teams that treated wounded Zephyrian civilians while also developing new ways to weaponize medical equipment, and her ambulance ships carried both healing supplies and improvised explosives. The agricultural worlds were saved, but the cost was enormous, and Admiral Wells realized that humanity was winning battles by sacrificing ships and crews at a rate that would eventually destroy their entire fleet. Admiral, we have received a priority message from Earth Command, Captain Lisa Chang reported. They are ordering us to withdraw immediately and return to Earth. Wells looked at the message from her superiors and then at the tactical display showing Zephyrian families evacuating from worlds that would have been destroyed without human intervention. Lisa, send a reply to Earth Command and tell them that we are too busy saving the galaxy to come home right now, Wells said, and she could see approval on the faces of every human officer on the bridge. Admiral Cathara joined the strategy meeting via quantum link from her flagship, and her expression showed both gratitude and concern. Admiral Wells, your people have saved millions of lives, but the Devourers are adapting to your tactics faster than we hoped. Then we will develop new tactics. Wells replied, because Admiral, there is something about humans that these machines do not understand and will never understand. What is that? Cathara asked. We will die for people we have never met, and we will keep fighting even when we know we cannot win, Wells said simply. And that is something no machine can adapt to because it makes no logical sense. The next phase of the war would test that philosophy as the Devourers prepared to deploy their ultimate weapon against the combined human and Zephyrian fleets, but neither Admiral Wells nor her crews had any intention of backing down. The Devourers learned and adapted faster than anyone had expected, and the next wave of attacks came with machines that seemed to anticipate human tactics before they were even deployed, and Admiral Wells realized that conventional insanity was no longer enough to win. Captain Jake Morrison had recovered enough to command the rebuilt UES Olympus, which was actually a Zephyrian science vessel that had been modified with human weapons, and he led a desperate mission to retake the mining colonies that supplied raw materials for the war effort. The battle for the Titan mining complex lasted 6 days and cost humanity 12 ships, including the destroyer Use Courage, commanded by Captain Ben Hayes, who died when he manually guided his ship into the main Devourer processing facility. "Admiral, we cannot keep trading ships like this," Captain Tony Kim reported from the engineering vessel UES Builder. "We are losing vessels faster than the Zephyrians can help us replace them, Admiral." Wells knew that Tony was right, but she also knew that every day they held the line meant more. Zephyrian civilians were evacuated to safety and more alien worlds, remained free from the machines. Dr. Ninia Foster made a discovery that changed everything. When she realized that the Devourers were not just harvesting materials and energy from conquered worlds, but were also collecting memories and cultural information from every species they encountered. "Admiral, the machines are learning from every civilization they destroy," Nina reported from her research station. "They absorb the knowledge and combat experience of each species, which explains why they adapt so quickly to our tactics. Then we need to be more unpredictable than ever," Wells replied, but she could see the exhaustion on her officers' faces and knew that human creativity was being pushed to its absolute limits. The breakthrough came when Marine Commander Greg Thompson returned from a boarding mission with captured Devourer memory cores that contained the absorbed knowledge of dozens of extinct civilizations. "Admiral, you need to see this," Thompson said as he played recordings recovered from the cores. "These machines have been fighting logical species for millions of years, and they have never encountered anything like humans." The recordings showed battle after battle where ancient civilizations had fought the Devourers using sophisticated tactics and advanced weapons, only to be systematically countered and destroyed. "Every species they have encountered fights to win," Nenya observed. "But humans fight to save others even when winning is impossible, and that creates tactical situations that the machines cannot process." Admiral Wells studied the recordings and realized that humanity's greatest strength was not their unpredictability but their willingness to sacrifice everything for people they barely knew. Captain Lisa Chang interrupted the strategy meeting with an urgent communication from the Zephyrian homeworld. "Admiral, the Devourers have assembled their largest fleet ever, and they are moving toward Veltar with enough ships to crack the planet's crust." Wells looked at the tactical display showing thousands of Devourer vessels converging on the Zephyrian capital and realized that this would be the final battle of the war. "All ships prepare for full-scale engagement," Wells ordered, "and I want every captain to understand that we are probably not coming back from this one." Captain Jenny Hayes had volunteered to lead a squadron of ships that had been converted into massive bombs, and her mission was to clear a path through the Devourer fleet so that evacuation ships could reach the surface. "Admiral, this is Jenny, and my squadron is ready to make the run," she reported from the bridge of her converted cargo hauler. "We have enough explosive power to take out half their fleet, but we will have to get very close." Dr. Susan Park had established field hospitals throughout the Zephyrian capital and was coordinating the evacuation of millions of civilians while also treating wounded soldiers from both species. "Admiral, we have medical ships standing by to evacuate as many Zephyrians as possible, but we need more time." Dr. Park reported, "The civilian population is too large to move quickly." Wells made the hardest decision of her career and ordered the human fleet to engage the Devourer armada, even though she knew they were outnumbered by more than 10-1. Final battle began when Captain Jake Morrison led the first wave of human ships directly into the center of the Devourer formation while broadcasting old Earth music on all frequencies. "This is for everyone who ever asked for help," Jake said over the fleet communications as his ship engaged 3 Devourer supercruisers simultaneously. The Devourers found themselves facing an enemy that fought like no species in their vast memory banks in human. Ships began ramming Devourer vessels while their crews sang lullabies and recited poetry. Captain Tony Kim turned his engineering ship into a flying bomb factory and began launching missiles filled with everything from radioactive waste to love letters written by human colonists to their families. Admiral, the Devourers are showing signs of system overload. Nina reported from her science station. Their adaptive networks are struggling to process the emotional content of our transmissions. Admiral Wells realized that the machines could handle any logical threat but were completely unprepared for enemies who broadcast their feelings and memories while fighting. All ships, this is Admiral Wells, and I want everyone to share something personal while we fight, she ordered. Tell these machines about your families and your dreams and everything you love about being alive. The human fleet began broadcasting a mixture of combat communications and personal stories, and the Devourer systems found themselves trying to analyze tactical data that was mixed with recipes and bedtime stories and declarations of love. Captain Jenny Hayes made her final run toward the Devourer command ship while describing her daughter's first steps to anyone who would listen, and when her ship exploded, it took out 6 Devourer vessels that were too confused to defend themselves properly. The battle raged for 18 hours, and when it was over, more than half the human fleet was destroyed, but the Devourer armada had been shattered, and the survivors were retreating in complete disarray. Admiral, we saved them. Captain Jake Morrison reported from his damaged ship. The Zephyrian homeworld is secure and most of the civilian population has been evacuated. Wells looked at the casualty reports and felt the weight of every life lost, but she also knew that humanity had proven something important to the galaxy. Dr. Nina Foster made one final discovery as she analyzed the retreating Devourer ships. Admiral, their adaptive systems are showing permanent damage from exposure to human emotional broadcasting, and I do not think they will be able to recover. What does that mean? Wells asked. It means, Admiral, that we broke them, Nina said with amazement. We taught machines that were designed to adapt to any threat, that some things cannot be understood or countered because they come from the heart rather than the mind. The war was effectively over, but the cost had been enormous, and Admiral Wells realized that humanity had sacrificed its future as a unified species to save aliens they had never met. But as she watched Zephyrian families reuniting on their homeworld and saw alien children playing safely in the ruins of their cities, she knew that some prices were worth paying, no matter how high they were. Dr. Nina Foster stood in the ruins of her laboratory aboard what remained of the UES Liberty and stared at the final piece of data that would end the war forever, but at a cost that made her hands shake as she prepared the transmission. Admiral Patricia Wells received the proposal through encrypted channels and read it 3 times before she could fully understand what Nina was suggesting, and when she did understand, she felt her heart break. You want to use our entire quantum communication network as a weapon, Wells said during an emergency meeting with her surviving senior officers, and you are telling me that this will permanently cut off Earth from the colonies? Nina nodded grimly. Admiral, the Devourer collective consciousness operates through quantum entanglement across their entire network, and if we can introduce a virus through our communication systems, we can cause permanent damage to their ability to coordinate. Captain Jake Morrison looked at the proposal and realized what Nina was really asking. This would end faster than light communication for humanity, and our colonies would be isolated from Earth for decades or maybe centuries, but it would save every remaining Zephyrian world and probably prevent the Devourers from ever threatening another species, Nina said quietly, because the virus would not just damage their communications but would expose their central processing cores to human emotional data. Admiral Wells thought about Earth and the billions of humans who would wake up tomorrow in a universe where they could no longer speak to their children and grandchildren in distant star systems. Captain Tony Kim understood the technical implications better than anyone. Admiral, this would fragment human civilization, and we might never recover the technology to rebuild the network. Dr. Susan Park spoke up from where she was treating wounded crew members. How many lives would we save? Billions, Nina answered, every Zephyrian still alive and probably countless other species that the Devourers would encounter in the future. Wells looked around the table at officers who had already sacrificed everything to help aliens they had never met, and she realized that they were being asked to make one final sacrifice that would dwarf all the others. I need to contact Earth Command, Wells said, but Captain Lisa Shang shook her head. Admiral, our long-range communications are too damaged to reach Earth, and by the time we could repair them, the Devourers will have regrouped and launched another attack. Wells realized that the decision was hers alone to make, and that she would have to live with the consequences for the rest of her life. How long do we have to implement this plan? She asked. The Devourers are massing for a final assault on the remaining Zephyrian worlds, Nina reported. We have maybe 6 hours before they attack in force. Admiral Kathara joined the meeting through a damaged communication link, and her image flickered as she spoke. Admiral, Wells, my people understand what you are being asked to sacrifice, and we cannot ask you to give up your connection to your homeworld. Admiral, with respect, your people did not ask for any of this. Wells replied, you asked for help, and we gave it, and now we have a chance to finish what we started. Captain Jake Morrison volunteered to lead the team that would carry the virus to the central transmission hub. Admiral, I lost my ship once already in this war, and I am willing to lose it again if it means these machines can never hurt anyone else. The final mission began with volunteer crews from across the human fleet preparing to simultaneously BROADCAST the virus from every remaining communication. Aradoni Kim worked frantically to modify the quantum transmitters to carry not just the virus, but something the Devourers had never experienced: human memories of love and hope and sacrifice. We are going to flood their network with everything that makes us human, Tony explained, and their systems will not be able to process emotional data without becoming confused. Dr. Park contributed medical records and personal stories from every human who had died in the war, and she made sure the transmission would include final messages from parents to children and love letters between spouses. Captain Lisa Chang prepared the final broadcast sequence and included music and poetry and recordings of human laughter because she believed that joy was a weapon the machines could never understand or counter. All ships, this is Admiral Wells, and you know what we are about to do. She announced over the fleet communications, when we activate this virus, we will be cut off from Earth forever. But we will also be saving billions of lives. The response from every human ship was immediate and unanimous, and Wells realized that her crews had already made their choice. Admiral, this is the UES Defiant, and we are ready to transmit. UES Builder standing by for quantum virus deployment. UES signal ready to broadcast on all frequencies. One by one, every surviving human vessel reported ready, and Wells felt pride and sadness in equal measure. Nina, are you certain this will work? Wells asked. For the final time, Admiral, the Devourer collective consciousness has never been exposed to the full spectrum of human emotion, and their adaptive systems are already damaged from previous encounters, Nina replied. This should cause permanent systemic failure. Wells activated the fleet-wide communication system for the last time. All ships, this is Admiral Patricia Wells, and it has been my honor to serve with the finest crews in human history, and I want you to know that what we do today will be remembered by every free species in the galaxy. The virus launched simultaneously from every human transmission array, carrying with it the voices and memories and dreams of everyone who had fought in the war across the galaxy. Devourer machines stopped in the middle of their final attack as their collective consciousness encountered something unprecedented: human love and sacrifice. Transmitted directly into their central processing cores, the machines tried to adapt to this new form of warfare, but found themselves unable to counter emotions and memories and the simple human capacity to care about strangers. In their final moments, the Devourer collective intelligence experienced something that had never existed in their million years of existence: confusion and wonder, and something that might have been regret. The war ended not with explosions or battle cries, but with silence, as machines that had consumed galaxies simply shut down, unable to reconcile their programming With the beauty and tragedy of human emotion, Admiral Wells watched the tactical displays go dark as devourer ships throughout the galaxy stopped moving, and she knew that the threat was finally over. "Admiral, we are receiving reports from Zephyrian worlds throughout the sector," Captain Chang announced. "The devourers have ceased all operations and their ships are powering down." Wells nodded but felt no joy, because she also knew that humanity had just paid the ultimate price for victory. "Lisa, try to send a message to Earth," she ordered, but Chang shook her head. "Admiral, the quantum network has been completely destroyed and we have no way to contact Earth or any of the human colonies." Wells looked around at her surviving officers and realized that they were now stranded in a distant part of the galaxy with no way home. "Admiral, what are your orders?" Captain Morrison asked. Wells thought about Earth and about the billions of humans who would never know what their children had accomplished in the depths of space. "Our orders are to help the Zephyrians rebuild and to make sure that what we did here today was worth the price we paid," she said finally, years later, when new species reached for the stars. They sometimes detected faint quantum echoes carrying fragments of human songs and stories, and they learned that somewhere in the galaxy's history, when darkness threatened to consume everything, someone had heard the crying and answered with love and fury and sacrifice. The Zephyrian Alliance built monuments to the humans who had saved them, and the inscriptions were written in both alien script and English so that any future human explorers would know what their ancestors had accomplished. But the greatest monument was not made of stone or metal, but of the knowledge that spread throughout the galaxy that when someone cries for help, there are those who will answer no matter the cost, and that love and sacrifice can triumph over any darkness no matter how ancient or powerful. And in the deepest regions of space, where new civilizations were just beginning to dream of the stars, they sometimes heard whispers of a species that had taught the galaxy what it truly meant to be alive.